The CDC says U.S. risk stays low. MSF says dangerous gaps persist. Same outbreak, same week, two very different rooms. If you're just joining, this started after Bundibugyo transmission crossed from DRC into Uganda and raised the pressure for tighter border controls. WHO and Africa CDC cautioned against blanket restrictions, and bordering districts on both sides agreed to intensify cross-border surveillance, pushing the response toward operational coordination, not broad closure alone.
This is Ebola Watch. Today, WHO is praising Uganda, while MSF warns the gaps are still open. We'll work out which one a worried parent should put more weight on.
Let's anchor the numbers. RIVM's June 8th update, using June 7 data, puts it at 550 confirmed, 101 deaths, 309 currently isolated.
Hold on. We cited 676 confirmed back on the 12th. So which is it?
Both, honestly. RIVM is a week-old snapshot. Ours was later. You're seeing the lag between when a case is sampled and when it's confirmed, not a contradiction.
And that lag is exactly my problem. 309 still in isolation as of June 7. Is that testing finally catching up, or just a bigger backlog?
That's the lab throughput question we left open. 550 confirmed by the 7th, then 676 a few days later, tells you the lab is moving. Whether it's moving fast enough is the part RIVM can't answer for us.
So here's what gets me. RIVM gives 550 confirmed. The CDC says risk to U.S. travelers is low. Are they even using the same denominator?
They're not even answering the same question. RIVM is counting cases on the ground in DRC. CDC is estimating exposure risk for someone boarding a plane in Atlanta. Different math, different fear.
Which is why today's step back matters. Confirmed, probable, suspected. If we only quote 550 confirmed, what do the probable and suspected numbers do to the picture?
To move from suspected to confirmed, you need a positive lab result, the gene expert run, the species match. Probable is a clinical and epi link without that result. Match them together and you can make the outbreak look either scarier or calmer than it is.
And that's what RIVM actually did well. They kept 550, 101, and 309 as three separate things instead of one alarming headline.
They did. That's the habit I want every agency holding on to. Now, the split. WHO commended Uganda's response this week and urged regional cooperation. In the same cycle, MSF marks 1 month on and says dangerous gaps persist in DRC.
Right, and I'm not letting that sit as a footnote. Parent of a Peace Corps volunteer in Uganda. WHO or MSF, who do they listen to tonight?
Both, on different things. WHO is grading Uganda's machinery, and that grade is earned. MSF is reporting from the DRC field, where the response is still chasing the spread. You can hold the praise and the warning together. They're describing two sides of one border.
So the kid in Uganda is sitting behind the side that's getting the gold star.
For now. And if WHO is praising Uganda, we should name the mechanism. Locator forms at official crossings feeding contact tracing leads. That's the thing being commended.
A locator form is realistic at a quiet airport desk. Is it realistic at a land crossing where traders have perishable goods melting in the sun?
That's the honest tension. WHO is urging cooperation, not closure, which makes the form the endorsed tool. Whether it scales at a busy border is exactly what MSF's gap warning is pointing at.
And contact tracing was sitting at 45% coverage. 1 month on, MSF says the gaps persist. That number's the soft spot, isn't it?
It is. 45% means more than half the contacts aren't being followed for the full window. That's the gap MSF named at day 1. And 1 month in, we need to know whether it's still open or actually closing.
Sounds like the same one. Which means, for the company duty of care desk, the WHO Gold Star for Uganda doesn't let them assume the best across the whole region.
No. You give weight to Uganda's mechanism, you respect MSF's field read, and you keep the confirmed and suspected counts in separate columns. That's how you brief this without panicking anyone. This one's from CDC.
CDC is responding to an outbreak of Ebola disease caused by Bundibugyo virus in remote areas of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, and Uganda. To date, no cases of Ebola disease have been confirmed in the United States because of this outbreak.
So, the CDC's June 16 page still says it plainly. Overall risk to the American public and travelers remains low. No cases here, no change to that line.
And that holds. The U.S. risk assessment is a different question from what the field looks like in Ituri or Nord Kivu. Both can be true at once.
Right, but here's what nags me. Low risk for a traveler, while the same agency is rerouting every flight from DRC, South Sudan, and Uganda to 5 designated airports. Those two things don't feel like they're describing the same outbreak.
They are, just from 2 control points. The screening funnel to Dulles, Atlanta, Houston. That's part of the machinery that keeps the public-facing risk low. The rerouting is part of why CDC can say low risk.
Okay, that I'll take. And the 21-day monitoring window after leaving, that's the part a parent of a volunteer in Uganda actually has to live with.
21 days, symptom monitoring, for anyone coming out of DRC or Uganda. That's the concrete instruction on this page, whether you're a worried traveler or a returning aid worker. This one's from RIVM.
In Uganda, the number of confirmed cases now stands at 19, of whom 2 people have died. Out of the confirmed patients, 14 individuals became infected during travel in the DRC. The remaining 5 cases involve local transmission, infection within Uganda.
RIVM gives us a dated snapshot. 550 confirmed cases in the DRC, 101 deaths as of June 7. And importantly, 309 people currently isolated, a third category kept separate from the dead and the confirmed.
Okay, but we said 676 confirmed on the show a few days back. So, which is it? Is RIVM behind, or is the count somehow shrinking?
It's not shrinking. RIVM is using June 7 data, published June 8th. The 676 reflects a later count. The 2 numbers come from different windows, and that gap between 550 and 676 tells you the lab pipeline is still moving through samples fast.
And Ituri is carrying almost all of it, 518 of those 550 in one province. North Kivu's at 29, South Kivu's 3. The map is concentrated.
That's the geography listeners need. Uganda's 19 confirmed also matter. 14 caught it while traveling in the DRC, and only 5 involve local transmission. The cross-border line is the story, and most cases land in Kampala. Here's MSF.
1 month after the Ebola disease outbreak was declared in Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, warns that despite the recent scale-up in the response, major gaps in surveillance, diagnosis, contact tracing, and community engagement continue to undermine efforts to bring the outbreak under control. A response that is proportionate to the scale of the outbreak is urgently needed.
MSF is marking 1 month since the declaration, and Kate White puts it bluntly. The outbreak is outpacing the response. Her words, no one knows the true scale or exactly where the disease is spreading in DRC.
1 month on, and the headline gaps are still surveillance, diagnosis, contact tracing, and community engagement. Those are the same 4 gaps MSF flagged at the start.
And the geography matters here. Ituri is carrying nearly 95% of the cases. So when White says treatment centers in Ituri are overwhelmed, she's talking about the center of the outbreak.
Here's the line that got me. Most patients arrive late, and the majority were never identified or monitored as contacts before they showed up. So the contact tracing net was late and missing most people.
UN News has the details on this one. WHO is on record now, commending Uganda's response per UN News and urging vigilance and regional cooperation. That's the first time this week we've heard an official body say one side of this border is doing well.
Right, but hold on. We just heard the MSF piece warning dangerous gaps still persist 1 month in. So WHO's praising Uganda the same week MSF says the response is moving slower than the disease? Which is it?
Both, Daniel. The praise lands on Uganda. The gaps MSF documents are largely on the DRC side. That asymmetry is real, and it's the first clear structural split in this bilateral story.
Okay, so for a parent of a Peace Corps volunteer in Uganda, that distinction actually matters. WHO is effectively saying the place your kid is sitting is handling this better than the place next door.
And notice what WHO is praising, not border closures. The background here is they cautioned against blanket restrictions and pushed coordinated surveillance between bordering districts instead. So the commendation is for the mechanism, not the wall.
Which means the locator forms at the crossings are the thing WHO is endorsing. I'll believe it scales when a trader with perishable goods fills one out without a 40-minute line. When I'm reading Ebola updates and they list confirmed, probable, and suspected cases separately, what actually has to happen for someone to move from one bucket to the next? And does it matter if a headline just adds them all up?
It matters a lot, because the categories are there for a reason. A suspected case is someone with symptoms consistent with Ebola and a plausible exposure. Fever, hemorrhagic signs, recent contact with a known case or an affected area, but no lab result yet. A probable case has a stronger epidemiological link, like direct contact with a confirmed case, but still no lab confirmation. A confirmed case is the category that rests on a positive lab result. Per the UK Health Security Agency's case definitions, that means detecting the virus through a test like PCR on a clinical sample. Moving from one bucket to another takes either a new diagnostic result or a documented exposure link that meets the technical threshold. And this is where adding them all together gets risky. At the start of the current DRC outbreak, Africa CDC reported 336 suspected cases and 88 deaths before lab confirmation had caught up, per the AP's reporting on the WHO emergency declaration. By mid-June, the confirmed case count had reached 782. But researchers and responders told the Straits Times that major data gaps still mean the true scale is unknown. If you lump suspected and confirmed together without labeling them, one number can swing wildly depending on how many tests have been processed, making the outbreak look much larger or, perversely, more contained than the confirmed data alone would suggest.
So, if confirmed cases are the most reliable count, why are there still major data gaps a month into a declared global health emergency?
Because getting a sample to a lab and getting a result back takes infrastructure that armed conflict and community distrust can shut down fast. NPR's reporting from Kinshasa noted that both factors are actively hampering the response in eastern DRC right now. That's why WHO declared this a public health emergency of international concern in May, to unlock coordinated resources and push lab capacity closer to affected communities. Watch for situation reports that break out confirmed versus suspected counts separately. The gap between those two numbers is one of the clearest signals of how well surveillance and testing are actually keeping pace.
If you have feedback, a story idea, or a correction for Ebola Watch, we want to hear from you. Email us anytime at ebolawatch@lanternpodcast.com. What we're watching next. RIVM says its updates on the DRC and Uganda situation will come twice a month, unless developments call for an earlier one. We've put links to every story from today's briefing in the show notes, so if one item stood out, you can find the source there and read further. That's Ebola Watch for today. This is a Lantern podcast.